All right. Oh, kitty time there. Beautiful. So as usual, although it says we're live streaming on YouTube, it actually is just the way that we're recording this. And then later on, I usually go ahead and make them public. But if there's any reason why you would have a cause for concern about that, then feel free to just let me know after this evening. But for now, let me go ahead and begin as usual with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So one thread that we see across many of the teachings of both early Buddhism and later forms, later traditions, is that we see an emphasis on the connection or the interaction between the body and the mind. And you may have noticed this if you are familiar with some of the basic frameworks, or sometimes they're called lists of Buddhism. So things like the 4 foundations of mindfulness. The first foundation is the foundation of mindfulness of body. And then the other 3 foundations are mental. Are about mindfulness of different aspects of the mental experience. And the 5 aggregates, which we'll touch on tonight, 5 khandhas in Pali. Right? The first one is rupa, form, which means the body and things that emanate from the body. And then the other 4 are mental, various facets of our cognitive experience. And we just did the practice of the 6 sense bases, meditating on the 6 sense bases, right? So the 6 sense bases are 5 aspects of bodily experience and the mind as the 6th sense base. And even the 12-fold chain of dependent origination, even the way that the Buddha described dependent origination, is a series that goes back and forth between the mental experience and the embodied experience. So this is a very important aspect to have a look at in our practice. This particular understanding of starting with the body. So form is usually, or rupa, as I said earlier, it's the Pali word for that, the body. Or kaya is also another way of talking about body in Pali. And if we think about our lived experience from moment to moment, it's truly an instrument, right? It's when you might say, if you think about it in computer terms or in other kinds of physical terms, you might say it's like an interface, right? There's this what we perceive to be the self, this thing over here, and what's inner to the self, and then there's the outer self. So the body is like our literal instrument for experiencing what's happening. And it's a very important point of reference for us also. It's a very important point of reference. I think for me anyway, as somebody who has a tendency toward more comfort in the mental world than in the physical world, it took a long time to really start to understand how to practice with the body. I always find the physical world, even today, to be still a little bit mysterious, more mysterious than the mental world, from my perspective anyway. But part of the reason for our being in the body, one of the most obvious reasons, is the present moment aspect of it. Where are we? Right here, right now. We orient ourselves based on our body. Interestingly, we do that even in virtual worlds, right? What do we do? I've not experienced this myself personally, but there are these goggles. So you put this thing that is over your eyes, and you can have these things on your hands. And so what is it that's happening, right? It's like stimulating the body to orient it to something else, to something virtual. But it's still a body stimulation that's happening there, interestingly enough, right? So this is our way of orienting ourselves. And so one of the things also that we notice, one of the things that the body teaches us is about its needs. The body has various needs. And in general, a human being has 4 nutriments, according to Buddhism. There's actual food, physical food, and then there's contact, and let's see, what's the other? There is 4 of them. Oh, I have them here somewhere. There's the 4 nutriments, and the 4 nutriments are, there's food, there's contact, there is intention, and consciousness. Those are the 4, thank you. So, and we usually, it's interesting to think about consciousness as a contact and as a nutriment or a basis, something that's needed for human beings. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. But food is a very important aspect of life. People can get very interested in food, very tied up in food, very attached to food. It has a lot of meanings, right? It has cultural meaning, personal meaning. It's a job for many people, like that, right? And the body also has needs for water and heat and safety and various other things. And interestingly, one of the things that we also notice when we begin to practice with the body is that there are different ways of handling the body in different cultures. So maybe you've seen this if you've traveled at all. You've seen, like even I think about, my time in Japan, like so many things that I thought were obvious, which were not, like toilets. They're different over there. They're different. And or like that, like the body's need for water, for example. So if you can see in the suttas ways that water was understood to be a very precious thing, right? So you see that people would say, the monastics would say, oh, we throw away our wash water from our bowls in water that doesn't have living beings in it, or at least discernible living beings that they could see, right? Because they didn't want to dirty up clean water that could be used for people to drink or animals to drink. So there was a feeling of how precious it was for human beings to consume water and that they should care for the water. And then many, many centuries later, in Zen tradition, for example, there is this beautiful custom of you put back half a ladle. So water, would be in wells, or it would be in these very beautiful stone containers. And you had these little bamboo ladles. And back in the day before COVID, then people drank everybody drank from the same ladles. It wasn't like a big deal at all to do that. But the understanding was that you never drank the whole ladle or threw away the whole ladle. You always drank half and put half back. That was how it was understood. And the reason for putting half back is because of that, is because of respect for the water, respect for the precious resource of not, just acknowledging how important it is that you receive the water, but also that you give some back for the next person and the next beings and the earth itself. So there are various ways that our body is orienting us to the present moment and to the environment, and we can tune into that and see that in all sorts of interesting cultural ways. But what else might we see if we get in touch with the body? Why is it that the practice, that this is such an important aspect of the path to awakening specifically, right? Path to enlightenment specifically? So for that, I brought my one and only favorite prop, as some of you have seen this before. I only have one prop that I use for Dharma talks, and so it must by definition then be my favorite. And it's this light up ball that I found in a toy store one time. And this is what we see when we actually start to practice with some degree of precision. When we start to practice investigation of bodily experience, we start to experience something called contact. And so contact looks like this. So let's say, for the sake of discussion, that this is your ear, and there is my voice happening there. It's coming to you virtually, or it's coming to you in the actual room, like Dave here. And then the sound hits your ear, and then it creates this little bit of consciousness called ear consciousness. But in order for that to happen, there has to be some consciousness already present, some engagement. And so for that, I brought this very interesting sutta, as y'all might have guessed, that there's a sutta involved. And it's the simile of the greater simile of the elephant's footprint, which is a very well known in some circles sutta from the Middle Length Discourses. It's Middle Length Discourse number 28. As part of my rains retreat for Vasa for summer this year, I'm reading through the Majjhima. I probably won't get to all 152 of them, I will say right now. I had that aspiration, but now we're far enough along in Vasa. It might not happen. But nonetheless, this particular sutta, it's called the elephant's footprint and the metaphor is that the footprints of all the other animals fit within the footprint of the elephant. And in the same way, all of the teachings of the Buddha are said to fit within the footprint of the Four Noble Truths, or the larger teachings that he gave at the beginning. And so I won't go into the whole thing because there's a lot of detail here. But there is a particular part a couple of things that I want to mention. So the sutta begins in Anathapindika's park. So Anathapindika was a very wealthy layperson who gave a big chunk of land to the Buddha and the monastics for them to, it was a very costly piece of land for him to buy from someone else who had it, and he had to give some number of gold coins that covered the entire surface of the land. Almost the entire, because he ran out apparently. But anyhow, so the Buddha was there often, there in Savatthi. And so there are some monastics who are there who are talking to the Venerable Sariputta, and the Venerable Sariputta is giving this teaching. So this is not the Buddha's. Venerable Sariputta is giving this teaching. So this is not the Buddha's words. This is Venerable Sariputta's words. And Sariputta is called in some areas like the general of the Dhamma. He was one of the Buddha's like right-hand students, so to speak. Extremely well-practiced person, arahant, basically, enlightened being, but also very able to expound the Dhamma quite well. In fact, he was named in the list of the foremost of this and the foremost of that, and the Buddha gave a list of the foremost of monks and nuns and laymen and laywomen, who was the best at different things. Sariputta was named the best at giving Dhamma talks. So he was often asked to do something like that, to respond to a question. And so he begins by talking about the elements and the impermanence of the elements in the beginning of this sutta. And it's very fascinating to hear it. So he says something like, so there are 4 great elements that constitute the body according to early Buddhism, and actually according to your lived experience, if you check it out. That's earth, water, fire, and air. And like for the fire, for example, it says, what is the fire element? So internally, it is things that are fiery, like that by which one is warmed, that by which one ages, that by which one is consumed, that by which whatever you eat and drink gets completely digested. So the fire element in the body is understood to be things like that, like the chemical processes that are unlocking energy. So like digestion, like the firing, that's why we call it firing of the nerves. That's what that is, right? Unlocking energy, using up energy. And heat, the warmth and the heat of the body, the most obvious way that we see the fire element. But then he goes on to say this. Now, both the internal fire element, so that's the bodily fire element, and the external fire element are simply fire element. Same stuff, right? Same fire, in other words, is what he's saying. Parts is parts, as I like to say. But then he says, okay, that should be seen actually with proper wisdom, not mine. I am not, this is not myself. Now there comes a time when the external fire element is disturbed. It burns up villages, towns, cities, districts, and countries. It goes out due to lack of fuel only when it comes to grass or a road or a rock or water. Or there comes a time when they seek to make fire, even with a feather, but it's not possible. So when even this external fire element, great as it is seen to be impermanent, what of this body, which is clung to and which only lasts a short while, right? And I thought about that, like in regard to the California fires, right? Or the Colorado fires, or the Australia fires, or any number of other fires we're experiencing around the world. And the same thing he says about the water. There comes a time when the water overcomes cities and towns and districts and whole countries, right? Like Pakistan. So this is a way that we're observing impermanence at the individual scale and at the global scale, and even beyond that, right? At the cosmic scale. Little by little, we can start to see these effects, these impermanent effects. So that's the beginning of the sutta, is to be aware of impermanence. Why? Because of this, what he's talking about the lessening of the sense of self that comes when we are more in touch with the impermanence of the elements. But then he goes on and he moves to this next part that I want to talk about, which is about contact and the aggregates. And so he says, internally, if the eye is intact, but there are no external forms that come into range, then there is no manifestation of the corresponding section of consciousness. I really like that particular translation. The corresponding section of section of consciousness, or the bubbles of thought, you could imagine them, or currents within the consciousness that relate to visual sensation. And then he says, if the eye is intact and external forms come into range, but there is no corresponding conscious engagement, then again, there is no manifestation of the corresponding section of consciousness. So what does this mean? So it means, for example, that if there is a person who is or a body in the hospital that is brain dead, then even if you put a light in, like the doctors do, right? Open the eye and shine a light in there, there's no eye consciousness that's going to arise from there, because there's no conscious engagement to receive that activity, to be impacted by that activity. But when the three come together, the eye, the form, and the conscious engagement, the corresponding conscious engagement, then there is the corresponding eye consciousness, right? So looking at the ball again, if the sound hits the ear and there is a consciousness that's able to engage with the ear, then there will be this little light, which is the ear consciousness, which has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? It goes away when the contact is done, right? It goes on to the next contact. And this, for me, is very fascinating to think about this. What do we mean by conscious engagement, right? How is it that the consciousness is attending to various aspects of the sense gates? Because as you saw, when you turn your attention to a sense gate, there are sensations there, usually. Occasionally, it's very, very neutral. Like sometimes I say, turn to the sensation of taste. And if you haven't eaten anything or had a cup of coffee just recently, you might think, there's not really any sensation there. Well, there might be very, very subtle sensation, right, that you might perceive, or it might just be so neutral that there isn't much sensation happening. But most of the time, if we look at the various sense gates, especially the mind gate, right, there is sensation happening. There is sensation happening. But we don't receive all of that sensation, right? The mind is kind of skipping along and seeing various parts at different times. And you might experience this in your meditation, right? One minute it's an itch, and the next minute it's 5 thoughts about what's for lunch, and then the next minute it's, that some taste in your mouth, or I'm thirsty, or whatever it is, right? There's a way that the mind is skipping along the various aspects. So it has to do with this word engagement, this Pali word engagement, which is samanahara. Samanahara, or samanahara, actually, means something like bringing together. And I like this aspect of engagement, right? Like we are staying with it. We're having this interaction. It's right there at the edge of our awareness. And its components, just to get really detailed about it for 1 second. San, anu, ahara. So san means well, and anu means to go along with. And ahara is the nutriments. So I knew how to written down, see that? Food, contact, volition, and consciousness. So to go along with those aspects that are fueling the presence of this human being, that's what we mean by engagement, right? Staying engaged. So what are we seeing there? We're seeing the impermanence. We're seeing literally how fleeting this mind and body are, right? Moment by moment. In fact, I would say the stronger, the more that the mind is able to slow down and quiet down, the more precisely you are able to see how much contact is actually happening. The mind is an incredible machine. There is a tremendous amount of processing that's happening, even in the time it takes to snap your fingers. But part of what we're doing is to allow ourselves to come into a more conscious engagement with that. A more conscious engagement with that. And that's often helped by the slowing down. Although sometimes it happens, and this is actually one of the insights, that because of the ability to discern different points of contact, it may seem like they're going fast, the mind is going faster, but it's just that the mind is observing the individual frames, if you will, right? So you're observing individual moments of change rather than that sense of flow and continuity that we have. But we also see the way in which we're appropriating the thing, in which we become identified with the thing, right? And I would say even the simplest of phenomena. So stop for a minute and think about it. You see a wall. Any wall, pick a wall. Right? And what do you think? You think, that's my house. Or it's not my house. It's a place, it's an office, it belongs to my business, but it's my office, so it's my wall. Or it's not my wall, it's my neighbor's wall. Or I like the color of that wall. Or I don't like the color of the wall. Right? Is it mine? Is it not mine? Is it close? Is it far? Is it helpful? Is it not helpful? These are all the things that we're discerning about even the simplest of phenomena, right? What is that? It's all relative to the self. It's all completely relative to this being, right? The other day I was watching a recording of Bhikkhu Bodhi talking about another one of the discourses in the Middle Length Discourses. And he was saying when he was first starting to meditate, he was in college and there was down the street from him, there was somebody who had a dog and the dog would start barking every night between 9 and 10 o'clock. Now, mind you, that was probably not the case. It's just that he happened to be noticing between 9 and 10 o'clock because that was his meditation time, right? And he said he would get so annoyed that he would like even walk down the street and hope to hear the dog so that he could stop at those people's house and say, hey, could you keep your dog from barking between 9 and 10 o'clock or whatever? He said, oh, he gets so annoyed at the sound of the dog barking when I was meditating. And we've all had it happen at some point or another, right? You're meditating and some sound happens. Maybe it's a dog, maybe it's the lawnmower, maybe it's your neighbor sitting next to you, your seatmate in the meditation hall when you're on retreat, right? Your partner, your dog, whatever. It could be anything. But here's the options. So one option is that we hear the sound during the course of meditation and we have some kind of a reaction like that, like for the sake of discussion, we get annoyed. There's another option that says, oh, I want that sound. That sound is actually helpful to me. So he said the reason why he would get annoyed is because it's not helpful. Okay, that's the discernment that he put on it at that moment. It's not helpful. But somebody else could say, oh, I decided that the sound is helpful for my meditation, right? It's helpful because I'm hearing a sound in the present moment, just like what we were doing a few minutes ago with the sense organs, right? So that's helping me stay in the present moment. So you could decide that the sound was helpful instead of deciding that the sound is unhelpful. But I want to give actually an even third alternative. Rather than good and bad, I would say that there is another alternative, which is it's just phenomena. It's just phenomena, and there's no need to decide whether it's helpful or not helpful to me, especially when you're sitting in meditation. It's just phenomena. That relative to me part is totally extra. Totally extra. So ultimately, I think the point of my talk today is again about getting really clear about the body as our instrument, and this instrument as demonstrating something about the nature of all experience. So some of you have also heard me talk before that there's the specificity of the content of what's happening. There's dog barking, but there's also within that, not separate from that, but actually within that, there is the process nature of this body hearing dog barking. Hearing dog barking. Or just hearing, without even the label of the dog or the barking or anything else. There is that nature of the process itself, which and the distinction there is the difference between clinging and what we call appropriating or clinging to or identifying with those contacts, and or seeing phenomena as phenomena, seeing the process of it, the mechanism of it, such that we can be so clear about that we can drop all resistance, because you know that that's how it works. That's how it works whether you like it or not. That's how it works whether it's helpful or not helpful, whether it's your dog or somebody else's dog, right? So to have that visceral, embodied experience can unlock something very deep for us. That's why in many of the suttas, the Pali phrase that's used for this, that's used for this way of having a direct experience that actually is capable of unlocking the identification, unlocking, releasing the grasping and the clinging, is called kayena pasitva. It means by means of the body having touched it. Right here in this body. And even if that ear doesn't work, if you were deaf, for example, or if the eye doesn't work, if you were blind, for example, there is still all the other sensation that's happening using that same mechanism of the 5 aggregates. So we all have it. We all are whole in that way. So I invite you to really have a look at the practice of mindfulness of body, becoming aware of this very moment as the complete non-separation of this thing from what we perceive to be the activity. So when we can be that close, that intimate with the phenomena and let it be what it is, then we will be free. We will be free of any sort of dukkha from that. Thank you. Those are my comments for today. Thank you very much.